What's going on? I got a document from somebody on social media, and it concerns the Q community and gender roles, LGBTQ community, as well as gender roles. So what I'm going to do, because I thought it was really interesting, a lot of the thoughts were very interesting. We had a very brief back and forth about it after I received it and read it. And I have permission to do this. So I'm just going to read through it and comment on it. But if either of those things are things that you think about or have thoughts about in any capacity, this will be interesting to you. So if it's too long, I'll clip it up into a few videos where it makes sense. But here it is. If the foundation of a relationship is perfectly in line with how God intended it to be, both are equal and one in Jesus, monogamous and committed to the other, I see no reason why gender of the two people matter. Of what I've seen so far, Jesus came and undid the physicality of the law. And then there's brackets, where we were once had to maintain a physical appearance to be saved. And now, and obviously there's a lot more to that, the law, they're just touching on one bit of it. And now he cares about the condition of the heart, which is one of my favorite terms to use, the condition of the heart. If God was so hung up on a person's physical gender, which of what I've seen, there isn't any of that after death. And what they mean is that after we die, there is no physical gender. So this user is commenting on why God's so hung up on somebody's physical gender if that doesn't translate after death. So I am going to stop right there for just a second, because that can go for anything though. So you have to, if you're in a tunnel, sure, why does God care about gender so much? It doesn't apply after death. But that applies to anything. Why does God care about marriage? It doesn't apply after death. Why does God care about objective morality? It doesn't apply after death. Why does he care about murder? Why does he care about rape? Why does he care about really anything that is ethical or is consistent with good values? Because these things, from what we know, they don't translate after death. They don't exist after death. All of these things are worldly concepts. So this is just, the gender thing is just one of about a million worldly concepts that, yeah, after death, from what we know or understand, none of them apply. So it's not an outlier. It's just one of many. Continuing on. Then he would also be hung up on the works we do while on earth. Now, you guys know how I feel about this. I do believe God is hung up on works, because I don't believe you can truly experience salvation, quote unquote, that entrance of the Holy Spirit into you, that moment of life-changing reality. I don't think you can experience that truly, authentically, genuinely, and go on doing things that you were doing before. Not to say we don't stumble, not to say we don't fall, not to say we don't revert to old behaviors and actions and things like that, because we definitely do. I definitely do. But in the grand scheme of things, I believe it truly changes the inner workings of the person. Which is why I always say, if the Christian doesn't have that dramatic inner working change, I'm under the belief that they're not saved. And I know that's a really hot take, and it's obviously circumstantial, it's situational. I wouldn't say that about everybody, but that's how I feel. So I do believe God, to a degree, is hung up on works, because I think works are directly tied to someone's genuine salvation. Works don't save us, they say, which is true. It's all about the heart now. There has to be a substance to why only men and women can be in a romantic relationship, not just because the Bible said so, quote unquote. The only conclusion I can draw from this is that as humans, we are to have babies. That means that my sole reason to be here on earth and find a relationship is to be an incubator. If this was the case, then the substance of marriage is wiped out. It wouldn't matter who I end up with, and there is no reason for love, because as long as I'm in a committed relationship with a man, then I'm okay. And then you got brackets again. And I don't get me started about infertility, because then it would mean that infertility is a sin, which is obviously not true. So let's pause there again. It wouldn't matter who I end up with, and there's no reason for love. I do want to comment on this, because in biblical days, whether it's Old Testament or New Testament, there is a slight transition from old to new, but either way, generally speaking, Marriage wasn't about love during those time periods. Much of history, marriage wasn't about love. It wasn't about you having this emotional tie to the individual. A lot of the times, the emotional tie resulted from the marriage, but the emotional tie didn't cause the marriage. The marriage caused the emotional tie. So now the way marriage is nowadays is almost backwards to what marriage originated as. Marriage historically, and obviously there are many variations depending on the culture and the geographical location, marriage was more of an arrangement. And in many cases, it was literally arranged. In most cases, for much of history, it was arranged by the parents. It was not something the two individuals chose necessarily to do. That existed, but it wasn't dominant for much of history. Much of history, you were arranged to get married. It was more of like a business transaction. It had to do with property. It had to do with ties the parents had with other families. It had to do with status. It had to do with occupation sometimes. So biblical marriage, Old Testament, New Testament, wasn't about love. It wasn't. And to a big degree, it was about having children. That's history. I'm not saying anything that I feel about it, what my beliefs are about it. That is just what it was. So now we have a lot of younger people. This individual is younger. It's definitely not a kid, but it's a younger person. And so I think that gets caught up in a lot of younger people's minds, like exactly what they said. Am I just to be an incubator? It wipes out the substance of marriage. Like, no, it wipes out the modern concept of marriage. But that's just the modern concept of marriage. And how has that worked out for us? This new modern concept where we function off of oxytocin and emotion first and then get married. Well, it's resulted in, one, the divorce rate has never been as high as it is right now. And two, the number of people who are actually deciding to get married has never been as low as it is right now because people are afraid of it. And there's a lot of reasons to that, but it's not the same thing. Marriage is drastically different than it used to be. Wildly different. Continuing on. I'm so much more than just capable of having children, of course. And I don't want to hear, quote unquote, well, two men can't actually love each other the way a man and a woman do, end quote. Because the only people who say that are homophobic and or have never been attracted to the same sex before. I've seen this firsthand. Let me pause there actually real quick. This is absolutely conjecture. Okay, what I'm about to say. I've heard, I have not done the research myself, so I'm not stating this as a fact in any way. But their quote there, well, two men can't actually love each other the same way a man and a woman can. From what I hear, not from my research, but from what I hear, scientifically, it's actually not true. And the reason for that, think about it like, look at us like animals. If everything is animalistic and you take the emotion out of it, men and men in the human animal is not natural. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. I don't mean it in a disparaging way. I mean it literally. It's not what nature intended, whether you believe in God or not. Men and men it's literally unnatural. Natural is for male genitalia and female genitalia. And then you get way outside of that, like, well, what about people who don't want to have sex? And what about people who don't want kids? Sure. But there's brain chemistry that is developed over many, 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 many years, right? And so some people will argue, and again, it is not me because I have not done the research, but I've heard the argument that because of that, men and men's brain chemistry and emotional chemistry isn't the same. Obviously, there would be outliers to that. And again, I'm not backing that because I don't know for sure, but that's just something that I've heard. So I feel like it's something to throw out. I've seen this firsthand, they say, to be absolutely not true. Or is my feeling of love so much deeper than other people? Do people really only see each other as bodies for sex? I already know that I'm demisexual, somewhere on the asexual spectrum, if you don't know. So maybe it could just be that. I physically can't see strangers or friends as attractive or sexual beings, only people I have deep connections with, which is why my husband is the only one I've been with and dated before marriage. If the sex of a relationship matters to God, then that means that a physical act can be redeemable in his eyes, which is something we can't do. Obviously, physical things piss him off, like outright harm, sin, murder, rape, cheating, lying, brackets, anything that hurts another person or yourself, and bracket. But the genders that make up a biblically sound relationship hurt no one at all except for if the law, because God said so, is true. Okay, I see what they're saying. I want to read that again. But the genders that make up biblically sound relationships hurt no one. This too is to a degree kind of debatable. And I say that primarily because of how society functions. So if everybody all of a sudden turns gay, which the social media and the media are kind of making it sound like, but we all know is not true. And I'm obviously conflating that to LGBTQ in general as a big, massive umbrella. But if everybody turned LGBTQ, right, whether that be gay, whether it be bi, whether it be the people who just are nothing, what is it called, gender fluid, or people who just outright refuse sex with anybody, if all of society did that, society would collapse. So to a degree, and let's take God and the Bible out of it. If everybody did that, we would not have families. And if we did, they'd be really weird families and they wouldn't last long just due to biology, because there would be no next generations. After, 100 years, society would collapse and humans could potentially become extinct. So there is damage that can be done if enough people abandon the idea of a nuclear family, taking God completely out of the conversation. No Christianity, no Judaism, no nothing. Take God out. Just biologically. If that happened, we'd have problems. Societally, we'd have issues with jobs being filled, things being able to stay open, things being able to be moved and shipped and sold. Like it does cause problems long term, and if there are enough of them. If it's a statistical anomaly, like it had been for a very long time, where just a small amount of the human population identified as gay, then no, that doesn't really hurt anybody, technically, right? That doesn't disrupt society as a whole. That doesn't disrupt the nuclear family as a whole. It doesn't do that. But on a larger scale, it definitely could. So I guess you just need to understand that. Okay, picking up the next sentence here, and he's never laid out laws like that, right? There's always, most always, take Job, for example, I guess, a reason for everything God does. So why is this the one thing that so-called Christians today are so hung up on? I'll tell you why Christians are so hung up on it. The rest of it is debatable. The reason Christians are so hung up on this right now is because it's being shoved down our throats. It's being infected into the church. It's completely dismantling the church, and it's dismantling the nuclear family. And there are degrees to this, right? So social media and the media are making it seem like this is happening to a much higher degree, a much higher rate than it actually is. There still aren't that many people who are gay, who are trans, who are bi, who are whatever, authentically. Is there a social contagion going on where there's a whole bunch of kids who think that they are? Sure. But we're finding out now as the years go on, many of these kids end up detransitioning and then suing doctors and, going from there. So that's why. It's because it's being jammed down our throat. It's being shoved on every news station. It's all across social media. And now the right side of the aisle has been so pissed off about it. And only, I'd say mostly, due to the fact that they are doing this to kids, the right is loud about it now too. So now you have the left-wing media, you have the White House, and you have basically all of what I'd call sheep society pushing this agenda, right? So it's very loud, it's very in your face, it's very everywhere. And then now, because of what is happening to children within that context, you have the right, you have Republicans, you have the other people, the Christians, you have all these people who now are very loud about it as well. So now it just seems like it's a really big problem, when in reality, it's really not. 5 years ago, did anybody care if anybody was gay? Not really. Not really. And even 2 years ago, did anybody really care about the LGBTQ movement? Sure, you had some crazy people, you had some crazy Christians who did care. But At large, I'd say no. I'd say it started to become a serious problem when, one, that community started to kind of try to take over Christian spaces, where now we have drag queens in church, and now we have homosexuals who are pastors at churches, which historically Christianity has been against due to what the Bible that we follow says. So you have this movement within the Christian faith that turns a lot of Christians off. But what I believe has made it such a significant problem that we're so hung up on it, as they say, is because of this shift into kids. The minute you start to involve children in something that is hypersexualized, you're going to piss a lot of people off. You're going to make a lot of people who would otherwise stay quiet become very loud, and other people who would otherwise stay uninvolved suddenly get involved. And so this whole issue has become 1000x due to that fact, in my opinion. Continuing on. I'm not ignoring the verses in the Bible. I just don't have an education on them like you do. Of course, I've been tangled in the drama online about the 1964 documentary that's coming out, and I was planning on seeing it. But since February, I've also seen how dangerous it can be for uneducated people, and I'm uneducated people, LOL. So I won't be seeing it. That's very self-aware. What I'm saying is that for every law in the Bible that God has written, there is a solid reason. And so I would kind of argue with that. It doesn't seem like there's a solid reason for a lot of it. Does that mean there's not a solid reason? No, of course not. I believe everything God does, he does do for a reason. And I believe it is a solid reason. But for humans, I don't believe that's always clear. And as they mentioned earlier, actually, take the book of Job, for example. The book of Job, part of the entire story is trying to convey to people that we have no idea what's going on. You guys have no idea what's going on. There is so much happening outside of your realm, so to speak, that for you guys to try to conceptualize what is happening in the heavenly realm is asinine. It's ridiculous. So I would look at it similar to that. So is there a reason for everything God does, every law he's put down? Sure. Is that always clear to people? I don't believe so, no. There's a solid reason, and same-sex relationships have a gap. I don't agree with that. I think it does make sense that same-sex relationships are not the ideal relationships for humanity and for society and for Christianity at the end of that. But I get why people say that. I get why this individual is saying that. And all the other sexual ethic laws of the Bible, they all have solid reasons for them. Heartache, division, STIs. But the topic of LGBTQ, I'm so torn. I want to be concise and explain my reasoning as thoroughly as possible because I know how touchy this subject is. I'm not trying to force my own opinion to be true by manipulating the Bible. I'm genuinely trying to seek what is right, and these are all conclusions I've come to over a course of many years. What I do find wrong with the LGBTQ community is everything else. Anything that isn't consistent with biblical marriage, I'm against, which means I'm not in support of biologically changing your gender. I'm not going to read the rest of that, but it's funny. Polygamy, a relationship with anyone other than a consenting committed adult, which to me at the legal age should be like 21 or 25. Good for you. I'm not going to read the rest of that. And the basic foundation of what the LGBT community are also things I'm against. Good. The LGBTQ community is so effing selfish, self-serving, narcissistic, and spiteful. True. It's like everything they do is to deliberately manipulate the model relationship in the Bible. No sexual orientation, personality trait, occupation, or whatever needs as much pride as the LGBTQ community has. You're gay. Okay, now stop making it your identity. There's no different. I guess I want to stop there real quick. I like this a lot because I like this person a lot because they're very self-aware, and not just in this, but always. This person is always very self-aware, but just has these very logical struggles in their head. And it's super cool to see them work through some of this stuff and still at the end of all of it, at the end of all these thoughts, be like, but I'm not going to try to put my opinion into the Bible. I just don't get it. I just don't get it. I just want it to make sense. And I see so much of myself in so much of what this person says in and out of this document, because that's how I always was. Like they're very objective for the most part. They really just want to understand. And I feel like this is the mindset that people really need to be in and learn how to live in, is open-minded, value secure, morally secure, objectively geared towards God's objective moral standards, but seek to understand. Don't just blindly accept things. That's what I love about this person, is they never just blindly accept what the church or what a pastor tells them or what I tell them. They want to know why. They want to understand why. And I really, really admire that in a person. I think that's incredible. There's no difference between straight or gay because inherently humans aren't those things. Our identity is being one with Jesus and having the Spirit. But if two men who are right with the Spirit and holy in God's eyes are together, why is that evil? Let's pause there. There's no difference between straight or gay because inherently humans aren't those things. Agreed. However, in this life, we are. In this life, we are human. And in this life, we live under human law. We live under sociological law and structure and communal structures and laws. This is the world we live in right now. Does that negate anything else she said? Humans aren't those things. Our identity is being one with Jesus and having the Spirit. True. But you're also a man or a woman, period. And you're also straight or gay, period. And bi, whatever. I do believe I don't think people who say they're gay or bi are making it up or are faking it. I'm not that person. I think there are people who are naturally inclined to be attracted to people of the same sex. I do believe that. That's not to say I think it's right or wrong biblically or just morally without the Bible, but I do believe those are natural proclivities that people do have. I've had gay friends my entire life, and I don't think they're faking it. I think some of it can come from trauma, but I do not think all of it comes from trauma. I really don't. But if two men are right with the Spirit and holy in God's eyes, and they're together, why is that evil? Super complicated. Super complicated. So she's kind of moved from the sociological structure and the biblical history structure to now kind of the moral argument, and obviously objective moral argument from God. And it gets a lot tougher to go through that when you get to the moral argument, because it really pushes us into, we can talk about society and how society would collapse, and we can talk about how each time in history we've seen societies lean hard into homosexuality, into sexual immorality outside of homosexuality, but we see them always kind of fit together, and then we see some kind of collapse within that society. Does that mean it's right or wrong necessarily? No, but history has kind of shown that. So I want to finish this, and then we'll kind of get into some of the why it's evil. I don't understand how just because of someone's gender, there are laws God makes about them. I'll save it. The only way I can justify making laws purely based on gender is hormonally based, which I kind of touched on before. That's brain chemistry. That's, call it hormones, call it brain chemistry. The way that we chemically interact with other people is real. That's a real thing. The way our hormones interact and cause us to behave. Your behaviors and your actions, if you don't know, a lot of that is hormonally driven, right? So men who have very low testosterone behave, act, and even think differently than men who are very high in testosterone. And this is why men past 30 should all get their testosterone checked. Because if you have very low testosterone, it affects many areas of your life. And most women and a lot of men think that it's just like your sex drive and your muscle mass and things like this. No, it dramatically affects the way that men think, your clarity of mind, how quick you are. Testosterone drives a lot of that. So hormones are really big in a lot of different functions. They go on, which is backed by science, and I understand. However, there's 4 ways of determining someone's gender, and a lot of the time, none of the 4 line up for some people, and most of them don't even know it. Because of this, the physical appearance of somebody doesn't always portray what lies beneath, which is exactly why Jesus was so concerned about the heart. I feel like, to be completely honest, I feel like this is a bit of a stretch to say that Jesus' concern with the condition of a human's heart has anything to do with gender, I think that's conflating something. I think we're trying to tie things together that I don't believe it has anything to do with that. I think the condition of the heart is the condition of the heart. I don't think it has anything to do with somebody's physical appearance or their gender. So none of the four line up for some people, and most of them don't even know it. Because of this, the physical appearance of somebody doesn't always portray what lies beneath, which is exactly why Jesus was so concerned about the heart. Jesus was concerned about the heart because the heart is the truth. The condition of your heart is the truth of who you are. It's the truth of what you believe. It's the truth of what you stand for. I don't believe it has anything to do with physical appearance or anything to do with gender or gender roles or anything like that. The condition of your heart is, and this is why I talk about Christians who are saved versus Christians who are not saved, whether or not, let me try to rephrase this. I believe, take a church of 1,000 people. All of them claim the title as a Christian, right? Many of them, in my experience, in my opinion, all they have is the title because the condition of their heart is not there. I don't believe they ever had that interaction with God. I don't believe they ever truly turned over their life, their will, their self to God, and then have kind of that entrance of the Holy Spirit that I mentioned earlier. I think there are many Christians who never had that experience, and therefore they're not actually Christian. And I think Jesus is concerned with that because that is a condition of the heart thing. To conflate it then with gender, I have a really hard time with that because I think they're two entirely separate things. One can exist without the other can't exist without the one. Now, I am going to be honest here. In this last section, they say that there are 4 ways of determining someone's gender. And a lot of the time, none of the 4 line up for some people, and most of them don't even know it. I will say this. The gender thing, I don't do it. We have men and we have women. We have women who have more manly traits, stereotypically male traits, and we have men who have more stereotypical female traits. When I was young, like a little kid, I had many female traits. Like I did some feminine things. I behaved in some feminine ways, all of which I grew out of, partly due to my surroundings growing up. And then I think partly due to just growing up. I grew out of a lot of those kind of behaviors and attributes that I had that would be considered traditionally feminine things. If I was born today, I was one of these people that probably would have been considered to be in the wrong body. And that's a great example because I think that's so many kids. You know how many young boys I know who like wore dresses when they were young, wore their sisters' dresses and stuff like that, or went and put on their mom's jewelry. Nowadays, we say that those kids are trans. There's something horribly wrong with that. We have little boys and we have little girls. The gender thing, you can say there's 1 million of them. You can say there's 10 of them. You can say there's 5 of them. We have men and women. That's honestly, I'm steadfast with that belief. I don't buy any of the gender stuff. So I might be the wrong person to ask if you want some nuance with the gender thing. You're a man or a woman, man. Like, and there's variation within those traits. Or within those categories. You have differing traits. But you can have a man who, no matter what you want to call him, no matter what he claims his gender is, he's a man. And he may exhibit feminine qualities or traits. He may behave in some feminine ways. It doesn't make him not a man. It doesn't change his gender. If gender is a social construct, then it can be whatever the hell you want. And that's what we're seeing right now, is it is whatever the hell you want. I don't buy that. I don't agree with that. I think we're overcomplicating something that is otherwise very simple. We have men and women. Beyond that, I don't really have an opinion because I don't believe it goes beyond that. So I have a hard time with that. But what I know is that the traditional formation of a family, the nuclear family, has historically, has statistically, in every possible way, been the most productive thing for society, if nothing else. If nothing else. And I think there is a lot more. But if nothing else, it's been the most productive system of relationships for a functioning society. And whether you look at Rome or Greece or Babylon, when homosexuality and men being effeminate and women being masculine becomes culturally normal, which it happened in all of those cases, Babylon, Greece, Rome, we saw each and every one of them self-destruct. So whether you want to say it's God's law, it's from the Bible, it's this, is that, historically we have examples of what would now be considered trans, I guess, and homosexuality becoming mainstream in a society, and that causing to societal collapse to one degree or another. So if you don't want to go the God route, if you don't want to go the Bible route, the Bible is relatively clear. A relationship, a marriage is between a man and a woman, kind of period. And if you take Genesis literally, which I personally don't, but most Christians do, then you have a very clear origin story that includes and consists of a male and a female in a beautiful, poetic manner where the woman is made of the man. It's not a man and a man. It's not a woman and a woman. So if you take all of the Bible collectively, you take the New Testament references from Paul, you take the Babylon deal from the Old Testament, and then you take the origin story from Genesis, you have, and Jesus's words throughout the Gospels about marriage, you have a very clear picture that marriage, as far as the Bible is concerned, was between a man and a woman. And then when you get into the Pauline letters, it becomes more clear because homosexuality is explicitly talked about, and it's talked about in a negative light. It's considered sexual immorality, along with other things like adultery. Now, with that, I will say, I hold a very heavy opinion that homosexuality is no different than something like adultery. So I believe homosexuals in a church or around a church or within a Christian space should not be treated any different than someone who has been wrongfully divorced, somebody who has engaged in adultery to whatever degree, somebody who has committed any kind of sexual immorality. Gay isn't this special super sin. It's sexual immorality as far as the Bible is concerned. So you do have this weird Christian culture that is obsessed with homosexuality itself being this super sin. Biblically, it is not. Biblically, it's perfectly in line with any other sexual immorality, any other sexual sin. And we do have indications from the Bible that sexual sin is above other sins, right? But it's not regular sin, sexual sin, homosexuality. It's sin, sexual immorality, in which homosexuality is in that. So I do agree that Christians have kind of created this extra space at the tippy top of the sin scale for homosexuality, and I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. So I treat and talk to and deal with people who are gay or bi or whatever no different than, I mean, honestly, for myself, no different than me, because I know the things I've done, not good. Not good. I've been a horrible person. So in no way do I judge them. I mean, I interviewed here on YouTube, I interviewed one of the guys from Gays Against Groomers. I think they're incredible. I think they're awesome. I'm a huge supporter for what they're doing because they're protecting children. So if I can't understand that there are gay people who are doing amazing things for society, for kids, for culture, and to a degree for the nuclear family, and I want to hold this weird grudge against homosexuality or homosexuals as if they're on this super sin scale, it's logically inconsistent, it's biblically inaccurate, and it just kind of makes you an asshole, in my opinion. But if I were, the pastor of a church still, and I was looking at an adulterer and I was looking at a homosexual man, I would talk to them no different. And then if we had a third person who, say, had been a drug addict or who had been divorced wrongfully, biblically wrong, I would speak to none of them any different. These are all just people who are in sin of some kind or another. The homosexual thing is really tricky because sex and relationships are such a massive part of life, of just living a life, of human happiness. So if I were naturally inclined towards being attracted to men and I was a Christian, it's tough because like I want to get married. Maybe I want to have kids even though I'm gay. I want these things, but to have them with someone who I'm naturally attracted to, being another man and a Christian, I have to either choose to realize that it's not God's intended plan for a relationship, or choose to live in sin, which would make you lukewarm and would make you, in my opinion, not truly a Christian, because you're consciously choosing to perpetually sin. And the Bible says that people who do that are no different than the devil, no different than the enemy, that they're demonic, because you're Christian, you know the truth, and you choose to go against it anyways. But I get why it's so hard. I get why it's so hard. And I'll make examples sometimes when I talk with people about like addiction, because I'm an addict. I did heroin for a long time. I've done pretty much everything. I like it, right? It's good. Heroin was lovely. However, it's not good morally. It put me and others that I know in physical danger, but also just in like emotional turmoil. So due to the fact that I know the truth, and I know that that's not what God wants for me, I'm not going to do drugs. I'm not going to drink at all. Is that a great comparison? No, because again, like if I was gay, I'd want a family still, personally. I'd want a husband. I personally would want kids still. And knowing that I can't have any of that just because, the Bible says so, as this person said in the writing, I get why that is so difficult to stomach. I truly do. And I wish there was an easy answer for it. And I wish there was an easy way to talk about it or an easy thing to say, but there's really just, there's not. There's not. You just have to take everything kind of collectively, in my opinion, and just go off of everything that I've said. And these are just my opinions, man. You'll hear all sorts of arguments about it, but the Bible is relatively clear. Historically, we've seen nuclear family systems function better for society's benefit than we have any other things. And now, I mean, just take this as another example, man. We have homosexuality, LGBTQ blowing up to a degree it hasn't been. And what is happening? Nothing good. Nothing good. Now, what gives me heart with that is what I mentioned earlier, gays against groomers. You have what I would call authentic gay people, people who are truly just gay. It's not their whole identity. They're not marching down pride parades and BDSM outfits. They're just people who are gay. I love those people. Okay, because they're just gay. It's not their identity. What about them? What about them? They're not perpetuating this craziness, this wild activism, this pedo blah, blah, blah towards kids. They're not trying to over-sexualize kids. They're trying to save the kids. So what about them getting married? What about them having sex, having sexual relationships? It's tough. It's tough. Biblically, it's tough. Outside of a biblical context, I support it. I don't agree with it due to my faith, due to what I believe about what God wants for people and for society. However, outside of that context, that's why I had him on and interviewed him. I think what they're doing is great, and I don't care how he lives his life. That's his choice. He's not Christian. He's not held to the same standard. He doesn't have the same values. I think he's great. That guy that I interviewed was lovely. It's all really tough stuff, man. It truly is. And there's really no easy answer to it. I'm going to cut this right here because this has already gone on way too long. And then the second half of this is going to be women's roles. She's talking about women's roles. So it gets a lot better. Love y'all.